Welcome to week 13B of Historical Geography of Israel. And today we're going to be continuing with what we started last week up in the area of Samaria, or Ephraim, as it's known in the Old Testament period. It's the tribal territory of Ephraim, and it's that section that is between the Jezreel Valley to the north and Jerusalem down to the south in the hill country. And so part 2, lesson B here, will be on Shiloh. And Shiloh has almost always Old Testament significance, so we're going to be spending our time in Joshua, Judges, and 1 Samuel. First I want to show you some pictures, so we're going to go to our PowerPoint now.
Shiloh. And so let's take a look at some of the pictures and maps that we have to orient us a bit here. Again, here's our normal map. So you've got the boundaries there, the Mediterranean Sea, the Arabian Desert. You can find Mount Carmel, you can find the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, and Jerusalem by this point. Okay, the Jordan River, of course, flows right through here. Here's the Jordan Rift Valley. Okay, and so we've made our way through various different sections. Here now, we've been up here all the way to the north in Dan, and we've come down past Beersheba down here to the south. We've spent some time on the coastal plain and worked our way up that way. We've been in the Jezreel Valley. You'll remember also the hill country that runs up in through here, and the Shiloh that's on the border between that and the coastal plain. Okay, just to remind yourself where you're at. Good to see that over and over again. Hopefully you're familiar with that now. It's been several weeks of looking at it, so let's go on. This is what it looks like from the satellite view. I won't spend any time here. We're in the West Bank though, so this is really the area that we're covering. So let's keep going. Again, the West Bank area here to the north of Jerusalem, heading up towards the Jezreel Valley being up in here. So we're in that area between, in this hill country, the hill country of Ephraim here. We were all the way up at the top last time with Shechem for part A. Now we're moving back down towards Jerusalem and going to Shiloh next. Okay. From this point, we're going to go to Bethel and Ai for part C. But right now we're part B in Shiloh, right here. Okay, and this is what it looked like from last week. From part 1, we have Mount Gerizim with Shechem. They're in the middle between, Shechem is in the middle between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. That's what the hill country of Ephraim looks like. And now we're headed towards Tel Shiloh. And this is it here. You can see the mound. This is an older picture. Quite a bit of excavation has been done. There are many more buildings around there now, and a visitor center, all that kind of thing. So this was quite a few years ago. I guess this is probably in the early 2000s. But what I want you to see from this is you've got a hill, a natural hill, right, with a city built on top. And so there's a bit of a tell here. You can also see surrounding hill country here. It looks a little bit more like the Shiloh, although up in this part of Ephraim there really isn't a Shiloh like there is down in the south. But you can see the valleys in between here. You can see even a road that follows through this valley. This is actually an ancient road that's been paved over now to make a modern road. And we'll mention that in the reading some today. But these hills up here, around here, I want you to kind of keep in mind too. All around, it's almost like a natural theater. So you've got a hill here, but it's not as high as the hills on the surrounding area. And I think that's significant as well, because Shiloh will be a place, again, where the tabernacle will sit for an extended period of history. And because so many people will come to worship the Lord during the time that the tabernacle is there, they're supposed to come up to 3 times a year, but almost everybody would come for Passover 1 time a year. The city itself wouldn't accommodate all of those people. But you could have people out here on the surrounding hillsides who could partake of the Passover meals and have their camps and all of that around here. And it's almost, like I said, like a natural amphitheater here with the stage of Shiloh right down here below. And so people can see certainly very well the tabernacle down here, and they can participate. And actually what's interesting to me is that they say that there's pottery littered all over these hills, all around the surrounding area, which would fit very well if the tabernacle actually had sat there for 369 years. Because over that time, people would have come to celebrate the Passover, and as a part of the Passover celebrations, a lot of the pottery that they would have used, cups and bowls and whatever, plates that they would have used for that, a lot of them were designated for sacred use only, and so they might have even broken that pottery after its use, symbolically stating that they wouldn't use it for anything profane, but only for the celebration of the Passover. And so it makes sense that you would find a lot of broken pottery littered in these hillsides around. And from what I hear, I haven't seen it personally, but from what I hear, that is the case, that you can actually find litters and litters of pottery in the hillsides around there. This is what it looks like from Shiloh itself, looking up at those hills and the surrounding area. And so this is, again, a bit before some excavations have been done, although you can see here that there are some signs that have been put in place and some areas marked off. But there's much more to be seen there today, and we'll take a look at that. Again, this is a bit of an older picture. And this is the theater that sits right on the top of the tell now. Kind of an interesting looking building, but it's actually a very effective way to have this theater. When you go in and you sit down, you get to watch a movie, and the movie is about Samuel and Hannah as Samuel's being born, and she's praying for him actually before his birth, and she comes to Shiloh to make sacrifices, and then comes to dedicate him at the tabernacle there. So there's a film about that in this theater, and they actually project the film up onto these windows here, and then when it fades away, they've actually got you overlooking the tabernacle area, which probably would have been down here somewhere, actually probably right where this picture is taken from. And so as the film fades, you're then looking at the remains of the place where the tabernacle would have sat. So it's kind of an effective way to do it. Not the most inviting looking building maybe, but the film is good, and I think you'll enjoy seeing that when we go there. A couple of films to watch at this site.
The very first place that Shiloh is mentioned in Scripture is in Joshua chapter 18, verse 1. And it's a significant place because it seems that Joshua set up his capital here at Shiloh, and it would be there for quite some time. Remember, as they were doing the conquest, and maybe we haven't talked about this much, but the conquest, the base for the conquest was actually down near Jericho in the valley down there, the Rift Valley, just a little bit north of Jericho at a place called Gilgal. And so oftentimes when the army would come in and they would invade the land, they would take over a city or a part of a city, especially when they're conquering the center part, and then they would return to camp down there at Gilgal. And so this really serves as the base of operations for Joshua during the conquest. But after the conquest is over, they head into Shiloh. And that's where we come to Joshua 18:1. It says, "Then the whole congregation of the people of Israel assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The land lay subdued before them." So the conquest is finished at this point in Joshua 18, and now they set up the tent of meeting, that's the tabernacle, right there in Shiloh. And it would remain there for about 369 years, as far as I understand, so well over 300 years. The capital and the tabernacle is set up there in Shiloh. And so that's going to be the base of everything from that point forward. Joshua doesn't actually mention Shiloh very much more than that. In chapter 18 and chapter 19, the land is divided up. The lots are cast for the different tribes to take their portions of the land. But that's really the only mention that's made of Shiloh for those 300 or so years. The next mention won't come again until the time of the Judges. The only significant event even mentioned in the book of Judges, it comes in Judges chapter 21, and it's after a very sad event, of course. There's an incident with a concubine that is raped and then murdered, and then because of that, all of Israel goes to war against the tribe of Benjamin. And Benjamin is almost completely destroyed. 25,000 men are killed, about 600 men live, and all of the villages and towns are destroyed and burned. And there are no women around left to be found either of the tribe of Benjamin. And so after this, the 11 tribes decide, well, we don't want Benjamin to be wiped out completely. We don't want there to be just 11 tribes, but to be 12. And so they say, what should we do then to give wives to these 600 men of Benjamin so that Benjamin won't be eradicated completely? And so what they decide is that they're going to go up to Shiloh and camp outside of it. And there's a festival that happens each year where the women go out to the countryside, and they're going to kidnap the women and bring them in and marry them to the men who are left of Benjamin. And so probably the festival that's happening there is happening at the tabernacle. It's probably the Passover. It doesn't mention what the feast is that happens there, but it probably is associated with the Passover. And during that Passover feast, in preparation for it, the women of Shiloh are kidnapped and given to the men of Benjamin as wives, so that Benjamin won't be completely eradicated. But that's the last really mention that we have of Shiloh from the time of Joshua and Judges, so that 350-year period, basically. And we don't really hear about it again until the book of 1 Samuel. So we'll go there next. All right, so if you have your Bibles, it's a good time to turn to 1 Samuel now. We're going to be spending some time there. This is the time when Shiloh really plays a major role as the scene for some major events of our Old Testament. So go to 1 Samuel chapter 1. Remember, we're about 350 years after the last time we encountered Shiloh in the biblical record. And so we're in 1 Samuel chapter 1. These will be very familiar events. Again, because of the beginning of a book, our author's going to do a really good job of setting the table, telling us who the major characters are, and the place where we are at this time too. Okay, so we always want to pay attention, especially at the beginning of a book or of a new scene, to catch the setting and the characters, because they're going to help us to understand the plot of what's going on here too. So let's use our good hermeneutical skills as we come to 1 Samuel chapter 1. Let me start in verse 1 there. It says, "There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim, of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zoph, an Ephrathite." Bonus points if you can figure out what an Ephrathite is. We have come across that before in other classes, probably not here in historical geography, but if you remember what an Ephrathite is, it's an interesting allusion to that there. Also notice in this first section it says they're of the hill country of Ephraim, and that's where we have been, right? This is the tribal inheritance of Ephraim, this northern part of the what will become Samaria later on. That's locating us geographically here, and then in the hill country of Ephraim. Verse 2, he had 2 wives. Okay, we want to stop there. That's going to be a bit of a eye catcher there, right? It should give us a clue about what's happening here. Oftentimes, the biblical record doesn't say straight out that it's wrong to have 2 wives. It doesn't outright condemn it. But here, it's going to do it implicitly rather than explicitly. Okay, so we're coming to a place where that's going to play out, and we're going to see whether it's wise to be a polygamist or not. All right, back to verse 2, second half. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. So there's already the plot for us, right? Here's the conflict we can see rising even in the end of verse 2. Verse 3. Now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. Verse 6. And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah her husband said to her, "Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?" After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, "O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant, and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head." As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, "How long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you." But Hannah answered, "No, my lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation." Then Eli answered, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." And she said, "Let your servant find favor in your eyes." Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. They rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, "I have asked for him from the Lord." Verse 21. The man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, "As soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him, so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever." Elkanah her husband said to her, "Do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word." So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord. And he worshipped the Lord there. Now, chapter 2 is the prayer of Hannah, and it's a very famous prayer. It's one that you're probably somewhat familiar with, and I'd certainly encourage you to read it. I'm not going to read it here now, but when we get to the site there in Shiloh, we'll read it together there. But you can see that this is a significant time and place. Elkanah is serving the Lord with his family there. They go up to Shiloh for the yearly sacrifice. It says they went at least once a year, probably went up to 3 times a year. And they're going to, actually, it's even called here in the text, they're going to the temple. It is the tabernacle. But many people think that the tabernacle actually took on a permanent structure during this period too. When we think about the tabernacle, we think about it as a tent that is easy to be moved from place to place. But remember that it resided there at Shiloh for 369 years. And so, of course, they would have made something a little bit more permanent than just the regular tent there. A lot of different theories about how that looked, or how that functioned, or even where at Shiloh exactly it was placed. Even today there's excavations being done there at Shiloh, and each of the different groups that's excavating has different opinions about where exactly on that tell the tabernacle would have sat, or this even temple, this more permanent structure. And there seems to be some places that are very suitable, given the right size and the flatness of a place, for instance. Even the place where it's located on the tell. Typically, of course, the place that would be most reserved for something special like that would have been the highest place on the hill where the tell is located. And so that's certainly one of the proposals now, is that the highest place that exists today is the place where the tabernacle would have sat. But we don't know for sure. There is a lot to commend each of the 3 or 4 sites that are given as potential places now for that. So now I want to turn your attention a little bit later into the narrative of 1 Samuel. We're going to skip down just a little while. It's actually quite a bit of time, but not too far down in the narrative. And we're going to go to chapter 3, beginning in verse 19. This is one of the saddest events of our Old Testament as well, and I think I say that a lot, but this is truly disturbing what happens here in 1 Samuel 3 at the end of it. But it's going to make for a transition, actually, between the time of the judges, moving us eventually into the time of the prophets, and then into the time of the kingdom too, the united monarchy, the divided monarchy. Samuel is often thought of as that transitional figure, something like a judge, but also like a prophet. And there's some difference in those 2 kinds of office. One of the things that Samuel will do is actually anoint the first 2 kings of the united monarchy, both Saul and David. And so he'll live long enough to see both of their reigns begin, Saul's end, and then David take over after that. But right now we're at that transitional period, and we're seeing exactly how bad things have gotten at the end of the time of the judges. As we read through the book of the Judges, we see that a lot. There's much mention of the fact that there is no king in Israel, and so everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes. You have political chaos, you have moral chaos, you even have economic chaos during that time as well. Not a very pleasant time to live in Israel. And it's partly due to the fact that they are not united around God, they're not all following Him, and they also don't have other means to unite them. And so throughout the entire period of Judges, one of the refrains that we hear is that people are constantly asking for a king like all the other nations. And we know that that's not God's desire for them, that they be like all the other nations. And yet God has also said in Deuteronomy 17 that there will come a time when they will ask for a king, and He will allow them to have one. And that's what we're transitioning into here and now at the beginning of 1 Samuel. We're going to see that time when God allows them to have a king, and we're also going to see how that time is not any better than the time of the judges in many respects. Okay, so let's move into chapter 3, verse 19. The end there. We're going to go all the way through the beginning of chapter 5 here, all the way through chapter 5, verse 1. So again, if you have your Bibles, let's turn and look at that. So 1 Samuel 3, beginning in verse 19. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. What that means is that everything that Samuel said was true when he was speaking on behalf of the Lord, and that may even include some prophecies or future predictions as well. But none of his words fell to the ground. That means that Samuel is dedicated to the Lord, and the Lord is honoring him by making him a true prophet for Israel. Verse 20, and all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. This is one of those places in Scripture where it gives us the geographical boundaries of the Promised Land, Dan being that farthest city to the north, and we've been there. Beersheba, the farthest city to the south in the Negev, and we drove past there as well. And so we know kind of the limits of the land, and that's what he's saying. All Israel from Dan to Beersheba. So he's talking about all 12 tribes, the entire length and breadth of the Promised Land, knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. Verse 21, and the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord. At this point, it's interesting, Samuel will actually just appear for the next few chapters. He'll somewhat step aside. It's not clear why, but his absence is certainly noticeable. The nation continues to decline, as it has throughout the period of the Judges, and now it's going to come to a particular crisis. And here it is in chapter 4, verse 1. And the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines. They encamped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped at Aphek. The Philistines drew up in line against Israel, and when the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the battlefield. And when the people came to the camp, the elders of Israel said, Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies. So the people sent to Shiloh, and brought from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who was enthroned on the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. As soon as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout, so that the earth resounded. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, they said, what does this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean? And when they learned that the ark of the Lord had come to the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, A god has come into the camp. And they said, Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us, who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. Take courage and be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Be men and fight. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and they fled, every man to his home. And there was a very great slaughter, for 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel fell. And the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophnius and Phinehas, died. Verse 12. A man of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day, with his clothes torn and with dirt on his head. When he arrived, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told the news, all the city cried out. When Eli heard the sound of the outcry, he said, What is this uproar? Then the man hurried and came and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. And the man said to Eli, I am he who has come from the battle. I fled from the battle today. And he said, How did it go, my son? He who brought the news answered and said, Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great defeat among the people. Your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured. As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died. For the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years. Now his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant, about to give birth. And when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed and gave birth, for her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the woman attending her said to her, Do not be afraid, for you have borne a son. But she did not answer or pay attention, and she named the child Ichabod, saying, The glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God had been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured. Chapter 5, verse 1. When the Philistines captured the ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. And you'll remember what happens in the story after that, but the Philistines then take it, and they take it back to one of their fortified cities down there on the coastal plain. And now this is the last mention we have of the Ark of the Covenant for some time, until David will bring it back into, actually it'll make its way up to Israel, or up to Jerusalem eventually that way, and David will bring it into the capital city. But this is a terrible day in the life of Israel, as it says, the glory has departed. Israel tries to use the ark as a magic talisman to help them in their battle against the Philistines. And because they're not honoring God with their lives and with their actions, but only using him as a charm against their enemies, God allows the ark to be captured here. And it is the end of a very sad era, but things are about to turn a corner in Israel. We're going to see the time of the kings with Saul, David, and Solomon is something of a revival, although it takes some time and is certainly not perfect. But it is something of a return of the people to unity among themselves. For the years of the judges, they've been divided into their separate tribes and worshiping him in different ways and also serving foreign gods at the same time. Now under the united monarchy, at least, we're going to have some centralization of worship and some uniting of the 12 tribes together. But that's going to be short-lived, and it's also not going to be nearly as successful as we would hope that it would be. So a lot of sad things happen here at Shiloh. Really, the concentration here is just in what happens in these couple of chapters at the beginning of 1 Samuel. We don't have a whole lot more action happening in this place, but you can see that it's a very significant place in terms of biblical history. Imagine a place where the ark sat for 369 years. So it has some significance, and I think you'll enjoy visiting it when we go there.